The last perspective I want to look at is God's perspective. And God's perspective is the most important. And when it comes to God's perspective, He deals with heart issues. We look on the outside, but God looks at the heart. In the Pharisees in Mark, what did He say about them? He says, they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They look good on the outside. They look religious, but God knew their heart was not towards Him. And God's perspective is the most important because according to Proverbs chapter 2, in verse 4, let me read this. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 4. It's talking about wisdom, and it says this. It says, if thou seekest her as silver, and searchest for her as hidden treasure, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord, and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of His mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. God's perspective is the most important because God is the only source of all truth, all wisdom, and all knowledge. And it's good for me to evaluate others' perspective, but when it comes to living my life, I want to live it from God's perspective, from a sovereign God's perspective who loves me more than anything else, that He gave His Son for me, but not just me, for you also. And the other thing about God's perspective is the only way I'm going to understand God's perspective is if I get in His Word. It's not about what I think about God, because sometimes what I think is warped. It's warped by my background. It's warped by influences in my life, whether they're good or bad. But God's perspective has to line up with Scripture. If it doesn't line up with Scripture, it's not God's perspective. Proverbs 9:10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. That word fear means a reverential trust. It means I come to God not scared, but a respect for who and what He is as God. And when I come to Him as that, then do I begin to understand wisdom. And knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And then I begin to understand God's perspective. Evaluating my own perspective, determining the value of my own perspective is good, because I can't grow personally if I don't evaluate my own perspective. Evaluating other people's perspective is good, because I can't experience relationships, fulfillment in relationships, or joy in relationships unless I consider other people's perspective. But when it comes to living my life, I have a decision to make. If I live life according to my perspective, I'm selfish. And I look at everything through the lens of me. If I live my life according to others' perspective, I will never measure up. I can never please everybody all the time, and that's not my place. But if I live my life according to God's perspective, it's then that I start to live a life that will honor and please the Lord and bring glory to Him. In Joshua 24, verse 14 and 15, Joshua's coming to the end of his leading the children of Israel. And he tells the children of Israel he wants to impart some things to them before he's not their leader anymore. Some important things. And he tells them this in Joshua 24, verse 14 and 15. He says, now therefore fear the Lord and serve Him in sincerity and truth. And put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. And if it seems evil unto you to serve the Lord, then choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua says, you want your life to count for other things? Fine. But if you want your life to count for the Lord, then make a decision and make your life to count for the Lord. If I want my life to count for the Lord, I have to live my life according to His perspective. And it has to be according to His perspective in the little things. If I don't do it in the little things, I'm not going to do it in the big things. My question to you is this. How do you want to live your life according to whose perspective?